Alright, so in this video, we're going to do a quick look at how to create some simple interaction. So in this case, we're going to make a sliding door. So we'll walk up to a door, enter a trigger box, and trigger an event to happen. So let's have a look. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and create a new blueprint, create an actor. We'll just call this door test. Go ahead and open it up, and we'll get started. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my various components to the scene and get those set up. So first thing I need is we'll just grab a cube, put that in the scene. I'm going to squish it flat. This is basically going to be our door. So this mesh could be replaced with, a specific one you create. And we can actually go ahead and grab this blueprint, drag it into the scene, and kind of scale it to size. So I'm going to make a door that goes across this little gap here. So move it in position, and then I'll go back in my blueprint and scale it out a little bit. A little taller. I'll go ahead and add another cube. And this is just for clarity. I'm just going to make some like pillars off on the sides, just to kind of blend into our walls. So I'll put one there, and then I'll put another one here. Let's see. Nothing crazy, just a simple setup. So you could create this in a different program, create it in Blender, create it in Maya, and bring your meshes in to set up for this. So last thing we need to add is a collision. We're going to add a box collision. You can see it in the scene. And then we're going to go ahead and size it up so it's about the size of our door here. Basically where the player would walk. Then we will go ahead and check our parenting, see how we have some stuff parented under this cube. We're just going to grab these and reparent them to the default root. Oops. Control Z. There. Now we got everything in a line, and then just for clarity, I'm going to rename this the cube that is our door, just so we know what it is. So last little bit of setup is we need to give ourselves a variable. We're going to create this will be our initial door position, and it's going to be a variable type of a vector. And now we got all our pieces. So we got our door, we got some just extra pillars just for visuals, then we got a collision box, and we got a variable of our initial door position. Alright, so now we can hop in the event graph and start setting it up. So this overall process we're going to do is very similar to how we animated a spinning cube, but the difference is we're going to trigger it when we cross into our box collision. So to get started, we can select our box collision, and then we can add an on component begin overlap. So what this will say is that when we cross into our box collision, trigger an event. So first thing we need to do is we need to set, or actually we can drag this in, we need to set the initial door position. So the initial door position will be, if we grab our door, will be the, let's see, get world location, and then this will be the value of our initial position. So before we can move the door, we have to know where the door is, so we do that first. So once we overlap, figure out where the door is. Then we're going to go into a timeline. So we've used a timeline before, And what a timeline does, add timeline. A timeline does is it just lets us basically create data that changes over time, so we can use this to, animate something. So we're going to open our timeline, double click it. We're going to create a new track. We're going to create a float track, which is just one value. And we're going to set the length to 2 seconds. And then we're going to right click, add a key, and then at time 0, we're going to have a value of 0. And then at time 2, we're going to set a new value. Now, to find out what I want that value to be, I'm actually going to come into, let's see, back to our viewport. I'm going to click our door here. We're going to look at the transforms, and we're just going to kind of, if we keep an eye here on the transforms, I'm going to move it into its, we'll call it its position, like its final position. And we can see when I move it, we move to 330 on the X axis. So Control Z. So now, knowing that 330, I can come back into my timeline and set my second keyframe to be at 2 seconds. I want the value to be 330. So now we have our timeline animated. So we can go back to our event graph. And now, after this timeline, or during this timeline playing, we have to update the location of the door. So we're going to set world location. And then we can see here set world location, and then we have door, which references this guy up here. So we're going to set the new location of the door. So now to make that happen, we got to go to our new location, split it, so we have our X, Y, and Z. Then we're going to grab our initial door position, so we're going to get it. And then we need to take this value, which is our track that we animated right here. We want to take this data and we want to add it to our initial position to update it. So we got to break this into X, Y, and Z, and then it's going to move on the X-axis. So we're going to add our track value to the X-axis and then plug this into the X. And then the Y is not going to change and the Z is not going to change, so we can just plug those in. So now if we compile and we save, we could press play. And when we walk into the trigger, it will play the animation. So we saw there it moved in the wrong direction. So that just means we plugged something in wrong. So what we see here, if we look at our little gizmo, is that we want it to be moving on the Y. So I plugged it into the X. So that's a simple fix. We just plug the Y into the add node, plug the output into the Y, and then plug the X into the X, and compile, save, play again. And when we walk into our trigger, it should slide open. So now, just as a little extra thing we can do, now we want to make it so when we leave the volume again, when we leave the trigger volume, the door closes again. So to do that with this setup, it's quite simple. So we have a begin overlap when we walk into the trigger. So now we want to grab our box and then do on component end overlap. So it's just the opposite. So when we enter the box, do this. When we leave the box, we're just going to grab the execution and we're going to go to our timeline and we're going to tell it to reverse from end. So it'll replay the timeline, but in reverse. So I'm going to compile, save. Let's see what it does. I'm going to press play. So now I walk in, the door opens. Now if I watch it and I leave the box and it closes again. So that's a simple setup. We'd have a look at the whole thing here. Make it a little bigger so we can see the whole thing together. This is a simple setup for a sliding door. We overlap our box, or our trigger box. We set the initial location of the door. We play a timeline. We update the new position of the door based on our timeline data. And then when we leave the trigger box, we play the timeline in reverse to close the door once again. So that's a simple setup for creating a